Josh Guttman here from Peachtree POCUS, back with another ultrasound device review. If you've been following the handheld ultrasound market over the past decade, you've probably noticed a clear trend. Most of the major cart-based ultrasound manufacturers now have their own handheld systems. GE has the vScan, which has been around for more than 15 years. Philips has the Lumify. Even Sonosite had a handheld device that was available for a period of time before it left the market. And for a long time, the one big name missing from that handheld space was Mindray. As someone who has worked in this field for years, I've been waiting to see when Mindray, who are known for solid cart-based systems, would release a true handheld solution. And handhelds really are no longer a niche. Some companies make their entire product line as handhelds, and the POCUS handheld market keeps expanding. Now, if you've been watching closely, you might say, wait a second, Mindray already released a handheld probe. And you're right. In 2023, Mindray launched the TE Air, including a model listed as the TE Air IP3 on their site. But although it was technically a wireless handheld, its design and clinical scope were limited. The TE Air IP3 was primarily a phased array probe intended for cardiac imaging, with some curvilinear applications. It wasn't designed to function as a full universal transducer for whole body scanning. And while it could connect wirelessly, Mindray's initial rollout focused heavily on integration with their own cart ultrasound systems, and the standalone app functionality became available later and fairly quietly. And that brings us to now. Mindray has officially released the TE Air e5m, their first universal whole-body wireless handheld ultrasound probe. It launched just a couple of weeks ago, but I had the opportunity to test it in advance and use it for several weeks in clinical practice. And that's the review I have for you today. In this video, I'll walk you through the e5m transducer itself, the app that powers both the e5m and the earlier IP3. Mindray did pay for usage rights to this video, but as always, this is an independent and honest review. The most immediately noticeable feature of the e5m is the footprint. It has a linear style form factor, something no other current universal handheld system uses. And if your POCUS involves a lot of procedures, it's an instant advantage. It feels and behaves like linear probes that you're used to. But that longer footprint does introduce some limitations for cardiac imaging, especially in the parasternal windows, where maneuvering between ribs becomes more challenging. And during real patient use, it didn't prevent me from getting the essential cardiac information I needed, but it did make obtaining perfect parasternal views more difficult. For procedural and linear applications, though, this design is clearly beneficial. Probe is lightweight, comfortable to hold, and lived in my ultrasound fanny pack without adding any noticeable weight. And aesthetically, like you can check this out, it also has this clean, modern look. It's not a reason to buy an ultrasound device, but definitely a nice touch. From a functionality standpoint, one of the biggest concerns with wireless handheld ultrasound probes is connection delay. If you've used other wireless devices, you know that waiting for an app to connect or reconnect can be frustrating when you're trying to scan quickly. I was pleasantly surprised by the TE Air e5m. The connectivity was consistently fast. In fact, there were several times in the emergency department when our cart-based ultrasound hadn't been plugged in and had run out of battery, and opening the e5m and getting the app running was actually faster than booting up the cart system. Another common issue with wireless handhelds is heat buildup. Many wireless probes start to warm up after a few minutes of scanning, which becomes uncomfortable for both the operator and the patient. The e5m performed extremely well here too, and throughout my testing, including prolonged patient evaluations and resuscitations, I didn't experience any heating. The probe stayed cool and comfortable, which generally surprised me given how common this issue is across the handheld market. Before we get into the rest of the review, I want to show you something Mindray sent along with the probe. It's the Air Capsule. This is their portable charging case, and honestly, the best way I can describe it is it looks like a little spacesuit for the ultrasound probe. You pull this side tab, and it opens up. It's compact and it's designed to charge both the new e5m and the original TE Air. It slips in right here, it closes, and then it charges. For my workflow, this was extremely useful. I store my handheld ultrasound in my locker at work, and there's no power outlet inside. And with this air capsule, I could leave the probe inside the case overnight, and it was fully charged and ready to go every time I came in for my next shift. And what really impressed me is the battery life. And I had the e5m for about 4 weeks, and I never once had to recharge the air capsule itself. If I had needed to, I could have easily plugged it in during a shift or taken it home, but I never had to. So if you're using a Mindray handheld in a remote setting, or if you have a storage setup like mine where you can't plug in a charger overnight, this is honestly a must-have accessory. The e5m also supports the standard wire charging, but the air capsule just made the entire experience feel a lot more seamless. So let me show you how the e5m connects. Here you have the power button. So you press the power button, which is right here. After you press the power button, the Wi-Fi signal starts flashing, and then you can press connect on your screen. Join. Then you're connected.
Here's the TE Air app. When you go into the TE Air app, you can connect your transducer, and mine is already on, so it'll connect. So before we get into the actual scanning, let's go through some of the options. First, going into the setup, when you go into the probe, you can see how much power there is left. You can change what the buttons on the transducer itself does. And so you can change whether you want a short or long press. This is what I like. The short press to save image, long is the save clip, but you can change it to freeze or unfreeze. And long press, you can save that to be whatever you would like as well. Now, if we go back, you'll see on the left side, we have the patient review, and the iStation is where you would see all the previous exams. It's not obvious that iStation would be where that is, but it's like your workstation is how I think about it. And that's where you can see all the exams you had just done. Scan Helper is great, especially if you're early on. This iScan Helper will help you learn how to go through all the specific views. So it'll tell you here on the left side, for example, here the personal lung access and how to do it. And it's not just for cardiac, but you can get to abdomen, urology, gallbladder. It'll give you some instructions on how to do it and what it should look like. So it's a good refresher. iWorks will help you go through specific protocols. A lot of them are more meant for sonographers with some extended protocols, because you can see that the adult cardiac has 51 images. But once you save a clip or an image, it'll actually start running through the protocol. See, it went to 1 out of 51 to 2 out of 51. And so if you were doing a complete exam, it would actually walk you through each of them pretty easily and remind you what you should be doing. They don't only have it for cardiac, but if I go to the abdominal setting, for example, and then I can see various protocols, abdomen, renal, EM, AAA, which you start with the proximal aorta, and then once you would save that, and then it would go on to the next one, and you can run through these complete protocols as you wish. It'll save as you go, so that's really nice. And then you can review your current exam from the patient and info. If you wanted to add a worksheet to be able to document in real time, and these are built into the app, and so you can document as you go, and you can use these for billing purposes. If you wanted to add a patient identifier, if you look up here where it says patient ID, this was one that was created. But if you press on this Bluetooth barcode scanner over here, if it's set up with your system, you can scan a patient's barcode and start scanning. So that's really helpful for an encounter-based workflow. So let's go back to the screen. We'll stay on abdomen since that's where we are. We'll get out of the iWorks. And then just the basic functionality on the screen. If you look on the left side, you can see which exam mode you're in. So you can scroll if you were changing it. And then under imaging mode, it's under B mode, but you can put on color, pulse wave, power Doppler, etc. And on the screen itself, it's pretty standard for Handheld ultrasounds, if you swipe right or left, you can change again. If you swipe up and down, you can change the depth, as you can see here. On the bottom, you have the freeze button, and then freeze, you have the camera button to save an image. If you unfreeze, you can hit that video camera button to save a clip, and it defaults to a standard 6-second clip. You look at this one with the stars here on the bottom left side, and if you do this, it enhances the image to what you're looking for. You can have the time gain compensation changed over here if you want. When you press that, you can change that around. And then it allows you to change the frequencies to be a little bit better depending on if you want a general or more specific exam. That's a lot like most of the other handheld probes, and it's pretty intuitive, but has the ability to enhance your image. And I'll show you some examples of that in a bit. So starting on the abdomen, show you the fast exam. So we can use the EM fast preset if we wanted to. We have part of the fast exam. You put on that enhancement. You can see how it changes the image to look a lot crisper. Here's the left upper quadrant view, and here's the bladder view if I were to save that. If I wanted to calculate a volume, I certainly can. I would just need to freeze. And then if you look on the side, once I freeze, I can calculate distances, volumes, etc. So if it has volume, you'll notice that the top left corner gives me a zoomed in of where the wall is. So it makes it really easy to measure. And again, I can get my D2. I can unfreeze my sagittal view, freeze again, and get my D3. And I got the volume up there. Move on to gallbladder. There's my gallbladder. It's nice and collapsed since I ate not too long ago, but you can still see how it's nicely made out. Here's what the kidney looks like. Here it is in short axis. You can see it quite nicely. We go to lung. This is in the abdominal preset. See, I got one B line there in the corner, but it's okay. B line is normal. You can see the lung sliding. If I turn on to the vascular access mode, just get very superficial, you can see the lung sliding pretty nicely. And if I get into the lung mode, then you really see the lung sliding and the A lines on my left side. Moving on to cardiac, I said before, cardiac can be the most difficult because of the linear footprint to get between the ribs. But even then, turning the gain up a little bit, you can still get a decent view. And when I show some images that I've taken on patients, you can see enough to know that there's no pericardial effusion and that the ejection fraction is normal. So it's not as great for the cardiac as the IP3 transducer, but it gets you some information that you need to know. It's only the peristernal views that are limited because of the footprint. Here's an ankle 4-chamber view. That really hasn't been much of a limitation because of the footprint. This is what color looks like. You can change the gate in the window. It's high quality. It even has tissue Doppler if you're going to do diastology. You can measure your velocities and the E prime and A prime and everything you would need to do over here on the side. So it's got advanced cardiac measurements. So moving on to vascular, here's the neck where you can see the IJ and the carotid. Let me show you with color. Here's the thyroid that shows up nicely. You can see the whole neck anatomy from right here. Let's move on to MSK. I'll show you what the Achilles looks like. So here's the Achilles tendon. You can see the fibers nicely. You can even zoom in a little bit, go up, and you can easily tell if there was a tear or not. Here's a quad tendon at the level of the knee. Moving along as it becomes the patellar tendon. And here's the patellar tendon at its insertion. In up a little bit. Yeah, if we put the image enhancement, that's what that looks like. With the linear footprint, nerve blocks or nerve assessment might be important in your practice. So let me show you. Here's the median nerve right in the middle. forearm. There's the ulnar nerve. You can see it right in the middle of the screen, near the ulnar artery. So it shows up really nicely. Here's vascular access on a Phantom, what it looks like on the e5m. So here's what it looks like in short axis. So you can see that pop in nicely. On long axis on this Phantom, you can see it come right in nicely. Now it does have this middle line. If there's something you like in short axis, you hear on the left, so you can center it. And a long axis also has this eye needle. So when I turn on this eye needle, it's going to highlight depending on what degrees you put it in. So here's 30 degrees from one side, 30 degrees from the other side. So if it's coming in from the left side at 30 degrees, so it'll highlight the needle a little bit more. As you can see, when I change from eye needle off to eye needle on, it highlights the needle, not in a specific color, but it makes the needle much brighter and easier to see. Here it is off, and here it is on. So you can see really that nice difference. Here's a Phantom model of a bone with an 18 gauge needle going in. You can still see that needle coming in nicely, targeting that bone in that bone model. If you were to turn on the eye needle, you can see that it brightens it quite a bit coming from that side, especially at an angle that's a little bit steeper, so you can see your needle really well. If I would turn up the gain here, I'd be able to see a little bit more, but it really highlights the needle quite nicely when I'm guiding it towards a bone or a joint in a musculoskeletal procedure.
Here's some examples of some pathology I found while using the e5m. This is a lung ultrasound with the lung presets, and you can see all these lines that really pop up nicely. Here's another example of B lines in a patient with pulmonary edema on the lung preset. Here's a patient with even worse pulmonary edema. This patient actually had a blood pressure of over 300 systolic, and he had missed dialysis and was fluid overloaded, and you can see his lungs how many B lines there are. Here's an example of a patient with a subpleural consolidation that you can see right here in the corner. The image is moving fast, but I'll pause and show you that subpleural consolidation right there. And that's a patient who had a viral pneumonia. This is a patient with a pleural effusion. You can see the spine sign through here and the simple effusion over here. Getting to the heart, here's a parasternal long axis view. So as you can see, you're still able to get a parasternal long axis view. And this is a patient who had a hyperdynamic left ventricle. As you can see, the walls here are kissing. This is a parasternal long of a patient with ventricular tachycardia. And here's a parasternal long axis of a patient with severe CHF and mitral valve calcifications. And so even though it's a linear footprint and the views are not as good, you can still get the essential information for basic POCUS scanning. This is a patient with a kidney stone and moderate hydronephrosis. And this is twinkle artifact of the kidney stone in this patient right here. So that color really shows up very nicely. This is a patient who was in presumed cardiac arrest, and this is the carotid and this is the IJ, and you can see some small flickering of the carotid. The patient had a very faint pulse that was really not palpable, but you can tell on this patient the quality of the vasculature in the neck. This is that same patient when he was pulseless with no visible pulsations in the carotid. This is a patient with cholecystitis who had a gallstone in the gallbladder neck, which is visible right there. This is a patient who had liver metastases, and so here's the liver, which takes up a majority of the screen. This patient had severe hepatomegaly, and you can see the heterogeneity of the liver and some mets throughout. This is a patient with pelvic ascites and a bladder with a Foley catheter. The reason I scanned this patient is with the ascites, the resident who was working with me wasn't sure if the Foley was in the right place or not because there was some distension, and she wasn't sure she was seeing the bladder properly. But here you can see that the Foley is inside the bladder, but there's also some ascites around. I hope you enjoyed this review of the Mindray e5m handheld ultrasound. If you're a procedure-heavy POCUS user, but want some universality of a single transducer, make sure to check it out. Make sure to check out all the other reviews on the Peachtree POCUS YouTube channel, especially if you're looking for a handheld ultrasound device and want to be able to compare different devices and see which one is for you. If you want personalized recommendations, check out our new handheld ultrasound consultation service. There are 2 tiers. One tier where you fill out a detailed form and I give you a detailed recommendation, and a higher level white glove service where we meet and discuss your specific POCUS needs. I introduce you to company representatives and all the way through hand holding all the way through purchase. It's really a small investment for purchase that is thousands of dollars, especially when many of the devices do not have a refund policy. Check it out at peachtreepocus.com/handheld. You can check out the link in the description, and I'll see you on the next video.